Hello, Bob.
Hello there. It's a pleasure to be on in Poland. Of course, Thomas Adamek has become almost like an American to the people over here. We know he's a Polish citizen from Katowice. We've been over there to do his fights, but you people back in Poland can't realize how big he's become in the United States, especially in the northeastern portion of the United States where he's living up in New Jersey. They're selling out, mostly Polish people, Polish Americans, and some Polish natives go out to support him wearing the colors of the flag of Poland, the red and white. And Thomas Adamek has become a really big star now that he's moved to heavyweight. And he's the only real heavyweight that the Americans can associate with. So not only does he represent your home country of Poland, but he represents the future and the hopes of the heavyweight division for the American people. People have taken him under their wings, and when he fights up in New Jersey, where the New Jersey Devils play in that new 20,000-seat arena, he packs it out. The crowds love him. It's predominantly a Polish crowd, but the Americans have really grown to love Tomasz Adamek, and we hope that he becomes a world heavyweight champion. We Americans do.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for good words about Thomas. But you have the biggest experience in professional boxing. Can you tell us a little bit? Because it's impossible to tell your real story. This is fat book about real story, what you make it in your life. But can you tell us something about the beginning of your contact with professional boxing? Do you remember the year?
Well, sure I do. Let me tell you first, the first professional boxing I saw. Of course, when we were kids growing up, television was just new in the 50s. I was born in the 40s, and nobody had televisions in their houses. In the 50s, very few people had televisions, but those of us who had televisions by the late 50s watched with our dads the Gillette Cavalcade of Sports, which was boxing from Madison Square Garden, Miami, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia were the basic cities. And so we grew up as kids loving baseball, the national sport, learning football and ice hockey and basketball, but loving boxing. Every young kid loved boxing in those days, and we knew all the fighters because there was only one ranking division, and they were the same fighters that fought on television all the time, so we knew all the fighters. And when I was a kid, the heavyweight champion of the world was Rocky Marciano, who was from the greater Boston area, where my parents were Irish immigrants, came over from Ireland and settled in the Boston area. But being an Irish American, I still, gravitated toward Rocky Marciano, who was an Italian American, and we loved him as an American fighter, and he became heavyweight champion of the world. So that's who I grew up with. Another decade later, I go away to play baseball at the University of Miami on a scholarship, and in my sophomore year there, which was 1963, a guy by the name of Cassius Clay is fighting a fellow by the name of Sonny Liston on Miami Beach. And Chris Dundee, who was the promoter in Miami Beach, called our baseball coach and asked if they'd send over some players that could see the fight and sell Coca-Cola before the game, before the match rather. And of course I jumped on that, the chance to see if my first professional fight was the heavyweight championship of the world, as it worked out. And when I saw it, I sat there in awe. I was only about 20 feet away from the ring, and I was in awe of all the Hollywood set, all the beautiful people out there, all the surroundings and trappings of the heavyweight championship. And of course at that time, Cassius Clay wasn't a popular figure in the United States. He was loud, brash. The races were different in those days. White people weren't crazy about black people, especially black, loud athletes, and black people didn't like white people. It was a different time. And nobody like Muhammad Ali, later we know became Muhammad Ali, drew the races together like Muhammad Ali and the athletes and entertainers, and it changed the history of the United States to a great deal. So to be involved in that particular fight, and then later everyone thinks he became Muhammad Ali the next day. He didn't become Muhammad Ali the next day, he became Cassius X. People forget that. He named himself after Malcolm X. And later with the political situation in the country, the Muslims tapped on to all the great athletes, basketball players, and especially Ali, and they named him Muhammad Ali. And Ali believed in the religion and believed in the Muslim way, and went on and had the fabulous career and You know, he was the first guy that told the United States governor, I'm not going to go fight for your cause. I'm my own man. And that wasn't popular at the time because Americans believe in the flag. They believe in patriotism. They didn't believe, especially a black guy telling the white man, I'm not doing your dirty work. And now we find out many decades later he was right and the establishment was wrong. And I'm a guy that had 36 years in the military, mostly reserve time. But you know, I believe in Ali. Ali's a very good friend of mine to this day. I started my boxing career calling fights on radio in 1966 on Miami Beach, and I got a lot of experience as a young broadcaster because I was doing 10 fights a week. Just think of the multiples, doing 10 fights a week. In 1 month, 40 fights. In a year, over 400 fights. So I got a lot of experience as a very young broadcaster, and then it was the evolution of television, when it made possible for fights from overseas to be done live and shown in the United States live on the same day. And I was in the early days of satellite TV, and the first big fight I did a heavyweight championship fight in 1968 when, when Jimmy Ellis fought Jerry Quarry for the WBA heavyweight championship of the world. It was after Ali was suspended and Joe Frazier was champ in a few states, but Jimmy became the WBA heavyweight champion of the world, and that's the title, that's the linear heavyweight title to this day. Excuse me. So that was my first world title fight in 1968, and this week when I do the Vasquez-Hernandez fight will be my 895th world title. Yeah, 895 world title fights. When I was inducted in the Boxing Hall of Fame, the World Boxing Hall of Fame, in 2004, their introduction was so extraordinary to me. I couldn't believe that I was the guy that did all this stuff that they were talking about. 10,000 fights at the time, close to 800 world title fights, and now I've gone beyond that and done close to 900, and I hope I do 1,000 before it's all over. Pardon my voice. I just finished up with a bout with pneumonia. I was in Afghanistan and Bulgaria and Turkey up until Wednesday this week, and I went home to Las Vegas, and I just got down here to Florida to do this fight telecast. So my voice is a little bit of a problem.
Sir, it's no problem. We love you. We love
Thank
you.
you.
You're the best. You're the best journalist. You're the best commentator in the world.
I appreciate you saying that, and I love it to hear that. Everybody likes to hear praise. Nobody likes to be criticized. But in reality, I'm one of the few sportscasters and boxing commentators that really genuinely loves the sport. And maybe I'm not a journalist. I don't claim to be a journalist. I claim to be a boxing entertainer as much as I can. I'm the guy that can make a bad fight sound good. I'm the guy that can take a mediocre fight and make it sound great. And I take great pride in being able to do that because I want to entertain my audience. I never ever knock the sport because boxing has no defense. It's an easy sport to knock. The writers and broadcasters around the world can blast the daylights out of boxing, and you know, the promoters promote a fight or their fighters, and nobody really promotes boxing. And then the other problem in the United States is the WBC, the WBA, the IBF, and the WBO get knocked a lot because a few things have happened that people question what's going on in boxing, yet boxing is the purest form of sport. I mean, we've had all kinds of scandals with drugs and football and basketball and baseball and the scandals involving the ice skaters in the Olympic Games and the terrible scoring of boxing in the Olympics, and you know, on and on I can go with the doping of the bicycle riders, and in every sport has its problems, and boxing has had too. Boxing suffered a great deal for its connection with organized crime in the first half of the last century, but since the 60s, nothing is more pure, in my opinion, than professional boxing.
Right. Sir, I don't want to bother you.
No, it's no problem. I love talking to the Polish people.
But you starting talking about Tomasz Adamek. You know everything about professional boxing, fightings from last 60s, then 70s, 80s, 90s. You see the evolution. You see the big changes. What do you think? What's going on next? What is the next step with heavyweight division?
Well, the heavyweight division right now is kind of like what it was for the blacks in the 40s and 50s. They had no other way to turn, and that so is the situation with Eastern European guys from the Ukraine and Russia, and in your case in Poland. it's one of the sports besides soccer or football that a guy can become a professional athlete in, and it's tough. So the great athletes in the United States today, the black athletes that come from the ghetto, from the streets, they don't have to fight anymore. They can play, they get college scholarships, they can go on and play basketball, baseball, football. They have all these opportunities today that they didn't have when the United States black athletes dominated, especially the heavyweight division. We've had our exceptional white champions from time to time with Ingemar Johansson, Rocky Marciano, and very few others. Now the dominant factor is the Eastern European heavyweight. They're all controlled by the great promoters in Germany, and they're all terrific fighters. They're all dedicated athletes. They live to box. They eat to box. They do everything to box. And so consequently, they're dominating right now. I think it may be a cycle, but for the foreseeable future, the United States won't produce a big heavyweight for a while. I mean, all you need is one guy, so there's always that exception. Excuse me. Because a champion fighter is really a freak of nature. I mean, all of us that have gone out and played an afternoon soccer match or skated in a hockey game or played a little basketball think that we can play like a professional athlete. No. Professional athletes, I've learned over the years, because I was a professional in two sports. I was professional in baseball and as a professional bull rider in the rodeos. And what I learned from the guys that I played ball with was that they're extraordinary, exceptional, gifted, talented athletes. And you mentioned Thomas Shadamak. How can he go from a middleweight through the cruiserweight, light heavyweight division, become world champion, become cruiserweight champion, and now will fight? He's ranked 4th in the world as we sit here talking. He's got a whale of a shot, probably the best shot at David Haye, because he's tough, he's smart, he's growing, he's dedicated, he's a puncher, he can take a punch, and he's a great kid and a great athlete and a great representative of Poland. And because of the fact that he's fighting and living in the United States now, America has adopted him, and we love him as if he were our own. Because all our fighters in the early part of the last century were immigrants to the United States. If you go back to John L. Sullivan and gentleman Jim Corbett, they were all Irish guys that came in. Why? Because they were the street people of the time. They were the tough Italians, the tough Irish kids that came from the streets, and that's why you have the tough Eastern European fighters today, including Thomas Shadamak.